It took me a long time, I guess because I'm slow, to figure out what these monsters are yakking about in their MAGA stuff. They've been doing it for 10 years now. Then I saw an honest, honorable, and fair Islamic woman in her hijab at a restaurant in America. And people started abusing her for no reason. And they were listening to them and recognizing them from being in this society, what sort of niche they operate from. I finally realized what MAGA means. It means make Americans bigots again. And it's really that simple. I was kicking myself for not realizing that from the get-go. They want a day that harks back to before the lunch counter sit-ins, when they can push and shove and pour shaving cream on people's heads for breaking the color line. Now you might wonder why I'm so slow, that I didn't figure that out 10 years ago. Well, I've had interactions with Donald Trump's minions, most celebratedly, and it drives him crazy because he likes everything to be clandestine. His followers like to click their teeth, click, 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 and say clandestine. His adjuvant, Trey Gunn, contacted me once and said, "You'll have to keep anything we say to each other to yourself." And I said, I'll pass. They get the idea that what happened at Pitt has an explanation other than the one that I testified to. And they impinge it through the media because Fripp is a celebrated warlock in the media with his Buzziana pals like Brian Eno. They don't tell the truth, but they make it stick. You know what I'm saying? And people think, well, there's largesse in that. There's moolah, rula, cockadoola. There's going to be some money problems. Who's going to own this yarn? And they figure Robert Fripp calling up Clint Eastwood to get Jimmy Curry in trouble because he's dissing Ronald Reagan in the Pitt news makes sense. Curry got himself in trouble. He was in over his head and some celebrities made a mockery of him. And Pitt fraternities think that that makes more sense than what I testified to. In a peculiar, demented way. They have a point because none of the things I testified to would have happened if I hadn't been targeted as a very young boy by these odious forces from the celebrity superstate. And that's where Pitt fraternities start to say maybe we should question whether or not these celebrities really have a point, because we'll get ourselves in trouble if it happened that way. So they say that I was worked over by Pittsburgh and ran crying to the celebrities. The celebrities weren't in on it all along. And that starts to make enough sense that they can get back to their old routines. And the Palace casino people have laid down the law as to where the money bags are going to be put on the storyline. And they start talking about establishing a narrative and people's versions of what happened. And did you quote me accurately? And it becomes a miasma of claims and counterclaims. So what I propose to do is to corroborate my testimony in ways that can't be refuted by legally peggly penny ante disputes over correct quotes, paraphrasing, translations from English to English, and so on. I'll give you some examples. Buried in my facial nerve is a neurological injury. I'll show you it. You can only see it when I pull on it with my facial muscles. See how it throttles? Okay. I did not know that was there. You can trace the history of how long I knew it was there by my behavior as it pushed its way to the surface. I was in emergency rooms having seizures, screaming on the streets, in an Iowa jail for 3 weeks for public screaming. I didn't hurt anybody. And it pushed its way to the surface where you can now see it. What exactly was that? Well, according to the letters that were sent to me from Israelis in Pittsburgh, it was administered by a unit named Jill, working with Bernard Watmaker, who was my neighbor, strangely, in Pittsburgh. He was an Attica State Prison psychiatrist. His children are in neurobehavioral research at the University of Pittsburgh, where my father was a senior faculty member. In other words, the source of this arcane injury, this strange neuroplastic implant, were neurobehavioral researchers from Israel at the University of Pittsburgh. How did it push its way to the surface? It pushed its way to the surface because Robert Fripp of King Crimson, Peter Gabriel, and apparently Donald Trump and Joe Biden did an undercover investigation involving a girl who was intimate with me, in which they claimed to have seen it operating in my eyes. And Peter Gabriel contacted me and even used me on a song called In Your Eyes. And by targeting this neuroplastic injury, they managed to detonate it. So that I went into seizures, screaming and crawling the streets of Iowa, not knowing that they had done that to me and that it was there. It pushed its way to the surface. Now that can be corroborated. I'm going to stop with corroboration and get to the testimony that I offer you about how it surfaced. First of all, I did not know what ocular gyrations were until I described this to Ken Mangerton at the University of Pittsburgh. And he said those are called ocular gyrations. I'll tell you what happened. One of my eyes would get pinprick pupil-wise, and the other would get huge. And then it would counter-dilate, so the huge one would become a pinprick, and the other one would get huge. And it was like a sledgehammer was smacking me in the head. I had my face pressed to the cement for comfort. How did I finally get it to stop? My eyes were spinning. I remembered what happened. I was 12 years old, freezing cold. I had bitten my fingernails bloody in my music class, and the teacher had sent me to the principal's office. I told the principal that I was going to be killed. She said I wasn't and sent me home. The teacher I begged to walk me home laughed at me. They were waiting for me in a stolen car outside of school. I was walking around because I couldn't bear the thought of trying to get into that school because I knew they would be outside waiting for me. And they found me anyway. And they kidnapped me. And they gassed me. And that's how that neurological implant got buried and siphoned shut. We had to sell our house to move. This was all before my 13th birthday or my 14th birthday when we moved to another neighborhood, a Jewish Holocaust survivor neighborhood. And when I was describing for Dr. Michael Soso of neurobehavioral research what this phenomenon had been, I described it as neuroplastic amnesia. When I first saw the images in my memory banks, which I did not know were there, I did not know that I had been kidnapped that snowy day because I couldn't remember it. The memory had sealed shut. That's why I called it neuroplastic amnesia. And when the bubble burst, the way that the trauma resolved was when I remembered what happened. So you won't find people hearing me talk about it before the neurological injury surfaced where you can now see it. So what happened was a phenomenon that I've only found one description for. I could see the memories, but they were so traumatic I couldn't articulate them. This is called alexithymia. And the reason I know that is because one of Watmaker's partners had a rare book bookstore where I bought Shaviti by Kazetnik, who underwent what they called LSD, quote unquote, therapy. And he had been a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Alexithymia is a form of amnesia where you see the memories but can't put words on them. John Schulman's gang rode me out of Pittsburgh because I testified to the post office that he had probably committed mail fraud. Was I wrong? Years later, he made the cover of the Smithsonian Magazine as the thief in the rear book room. He was caught red-handed, stealing $8 million worth of library books and selling them to who? His most sinister employee came over to the house of Adam Eisenstadt, an Israeli berserker, who used to get on KDK radio disguising his voice as Abdul the terrorist and pretending he was a Palestinian, scaring people, making terroristic threats when he was a Jewish berserker. He is now a ghostwriter for Donald J. Trump. You can verify that by checking his website. Adam Eisenstadt worked at the Pitt News with me. And yet Pitt banned me. They hired a stunt driver to recklessly drive around a school bus. I was a furious passenger who quit the job over the incident. And they tried to blame me as the driver. And they have never remedied this outrage. Never. Watmaker continues to work at neurobehavioral research. Pitt continues to apply snide innuendos about me. They refuse to investigate the murder of my father. They refuse to identify the fact that Donald Trump is almost certainly one of the people who was buying knowingly stolen books from the Carnegie Museum from John Schulman, and he's still employing an Israeli berserker who pretended to be Abdul the terrorist on KDKA radio to this same hour. Now, and I've told you two things. One can be corroborated, and that is about the neuroplasm that was put in my facial nerve. And that the memory that it sealed shut was of being kidnapped in a stolen car by the pitman as a child and gassed. What do I mean that I was gassed? They put a rag drenched in paint thinner in a paper bag and forced me to hold it over my nose and mouth and breathe it. The school in which the principal's office I went to, crying with bloody fingernails I was biting for fear of being killed, didn't report my absence and didn't look for me, even though I didn't come back to school for months. And this is the story that that weasel from King Crimson has covered for by saying it's not true, that I was taunting Reagan, and so he called Clint Eastwood and their friends to do me a favor by getting rid of me.